Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, I'm going to react to 6 reasons why American English actually makes sense. American English is quite interesting because you would assume that, if a country was to take the English language, they would just like clone it, that it would be exactly the same just because, you would want to follow the same sort of rules and things like that. And so to discover that American English has a few different spellings, like, here and there, it's quite interesting. I'd love to know why that is, but this video is about how it works, and it's by Lost in the Pond, a channel that I love, so I know it's going to be good. So let's do it.
Hello, I'm Lawrence, and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to English. If you can understand the words that I'm saying now, that means you have at least a decent grasp of English and Lawrence speak. But one person's English, whether that be vocabulary, spelling, or pronunciation, might not be the same as your English. And often, differences like this lead people to be suspicious of the other person's English, to somehow think, if only in a jovial manner, that their brand of English is inferior to mine. A common example of this, I have to concede, is when some of my fellow Brits like to criticise or poke fun at American English. And I have to admit, when I was younger, I was one of those Brits. But then I went to university and 2 things happened. 1, I interacted with American students. And 2, I did a useless degree in linguistics and took a module on English varieties. And after that...
A useless degree in linguistics. With a degree in linguistics, what kind of jobs would that typically, go into? Like, it's one of those degrees that doesn't really seem to have a clear path, unless I just don't know what path it is.
My mind was opened. American English wasn't wrong, it was fascinating. It's a variety of English whose story has often been lost to time. Because just as there are countless fascinating histories behind the words we use in Britain, the same is also true of the United States. And so without further ado, here are 6 reasons that American English isn't wrong. The longer that I do this channel, the more examples I discover of words or language concepts that we perceive to be American but actually originated in Britain. And on this subject, I've talked extensively about soccer and aluminum, but I think my favourite example is the word herb. To us Brits, hearing Americans drop the H on the word herb can often feel weird. But here's the thing, back in the day, we used to do it. There was a slew of words that entered the English language via Old French that incorporated a silent H. This included honour, hour, hors d'oeuvre, and yes, herb. But Brits just stopped pronouncing it herb in, I want to say, the 19th century, because it was soon considered the way commoners spoke, and the upper classes can't be having that. And so eventually, in Britain, it was dropped altogether, and America, on the other side of the ocean, didn't get the memo. And when it comes to this, there are...
A lot of people in the UK still say herb, like, got any herbs? You're going to stick some herbs in there, mate? Yeah, mate. Yeah, like the Cockney people.
Actually, 2 other things that make us Brits a little bit hypocritical when judging the American pronunciation of herb. Firstly, we're forever dropping H's. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but recently I've had an haircut. That's northern for haircut. And secondly, before we start handing out diktats on how to pronounce the letter H, some would suggest we might want to learn how to pronounce the word H. Some, not me. I'm open to multiple interpretations. But the fact remains that in a dictionary, the word H ends in an H, but it doesn't start with one. Oh, and while we're on the subject of pronunciation, that brings us on to this. In Britain, we're sometimes very quick to judge the way in which Americans pronounce words, maybe because it's so markedly different from the way we do. But this hasn't always been the case now, has it? Because as many of my subscribers have asked me over the years, Lawrence, is it true that features of American English are similar to the way in which people spoke in England in the 1600s? To some degree, yes. A good example of this is that back then, most of Britain would have pronounced the R in words like card. That linguistic phenomenon is known as rhoticity and is a large feature, of course, of American English today. In Britain, it still survives in pockets, like in the southwest of England and also Scotland, but it's ceased to be a feature of British English in most other parts. Obviously, one of the big differences between our 2 forms of English is the way in which we spell words.
Yeah, like for example, like over here, the word colour, for example, we would spell it C-O-L-O-U-R. Whereas in America, I think it's spelled C-O-L-O-R. Like, why? Why is that? Why isn't it just the same thing?
And maybe because most of American English derive from its British equivalent, we in Britain feel almost duty-bound to voice our disapproval of how Americans spell words. But I feel like we have to be careful about that because there is in fact quite an orderly nature to a lot of American English spelling rules. You know, I used this example the other day. If you're ever confused as to why Americans use the suffix IZE as opposed to ISE, then two things, that's not always the case, because secondly, American English likes to distinguish between words that came from Greek and have the suffix IZE and words that came from Old French that have the suffix ISE. So in American English, for every internalize, you also have exercise. In Britain, we tend to not make this distinction. Whether the word came from Old French or Greek, it usually ends in ISE. And to me, I'm perfectly fine with this as well. Additionally,
to be honest, IZE for words like internalize, exercise, formalize, it does kind of make sense because the sound is closer to a Z sound anyway than an S. So yeah, in that regard, it's probably the American spelling is, or the American versions are probably better.
we like to be puzzled as to why Americans drop the U in words like colour and honour. But the truth is, we actually did the initial change. Because in Old French, from which words like this derive, the words colour and honour were spelled just as they are now in an American dictionary. One charge that I often hear get levelled at American English is that it doesn't have many kind of fantastical words like Britain does. But having lived here for as long as I have, and crucially having done this channel, I've learned that America has coined some absolutely gorgeous words, some of which are used only in the United States, some of which are now archaic, and some of which actually made it to the rest of the English-speaking world. So these words include snollygoster, cattywampus,
cattywampus,
Duddy, wangdoodle, pulchritudinous, humdinger, doohickey, valedictorian, lollapalooza, ornery, poppycock, not a British word, malarkey, cahoots, discombobulate, panhandle, conniption.
I didn't know discombobulate was actually a word. It means to confuse, right? Or to disorientate.
And highfalutin.
What does highfalutin mean?
Sometimes, every now and again, I'll be on Twitter, which was my first mistake, and someone will gain a lot of traction simply by saying, I hate the way Americans say soccer, it's football. Now, I'm not going to go over the fact again that the word soccer was in fact coined in Britain. Instead, I'm going to highlight a fact that many people just seem to forget, and that is that soccer isn't unique to American English. The word is used in Canada, South Africa, Australia, Ireland, and occasionally England. Between you and me, it's time we stop hearing about this. Especially since us Brits have been using American English all our lives. You see, the thing is, the English language has a plethora of words that were coined in the United States. Sadly, plethora wasn't one of them. In addition to the hundreds, if not thousands, of technological words that the country has given us, it's also added gimmick, hangover, hassle, fudge, hindsight, lengthy, belittle, okay, and hello, to name a few. Language is ever evolving, and whether we're talking about British, American, Australian, Canadian, or New Zealand English, so long as we understand each other, that's all that matters.
Absolutely.
Did you understand me throughout that? Right, well, we'll do some retakes. That's it for this episode. Let me know.
I love Lost in the Pond. Such a great channel. Lawrence does a great job. To be fair, I did not know that soccer was actually an English word. I mean, wow. I would have put most of my money on the fact that it came from America. You never know. I guess you learn something new every day. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.